Good day, boaters. Keith McGowan here. I am the Outboard Dad, here to help you have a better boating experience. Today, we're going to continue that long debate that's going to go on for, I believe, several more years until two-strokes are almost phased completely out just because of time. But there'll always be those people who want to run that two-stroke until it dies. Let's get into it. But before we do, send me your comments. We're going to review some of the comments from my last video about two-stroke versus four-stroke, benefits of one, benefits of another, downfall of the two-stroke, all of those things we're going to get into, but we're going to talk about some of your comments that you had for this video, and let's talk about them a little bit. So, Paul, he says, the 1988 four-stroke 125 cycle has been a real challenge to keep it running. So, why would you want to continue and invest in it? Now, when he says real challenge, does he mean he put a lot of time and effort into it? Or did he put a lot of money into it because it was temperamental and he was changing a lot of parts? A very interesting quote from my buddy Von Vladimir Voltar. What does he say? An old paid-off working two-stroke is better or beats a four-stroke that you're making payments on every month. So how can you argue with that? If it's running and working well, why not keep running it? Now, there are environmental issues we talk about, but let's get into some of your other comments here that you guys had. Stuart here, Stuart Park, says, the direct injection Mercury Optimax engines were as fuel efficient as any four-stroke motor. What's your experience? Have you run an Optimax and then switched to a four-stroke to see the actual difference? I also know gentlemen on here that talk about their G2 that was just as efficient as the four-stroke that they've owned for several years now. They just got away from the G2 because of multiple challenges they had with them, and they were just done with it. Let's keep it going. Nonpulst says, I'm going to run my two-stroke Mercury 135 as long as it would go, as it will go. Main reason, it's a huge money to replace with a four-stroke. Now, are we talking compared to new, or can you pick up used? And what is the used market like for four-stroke as opposed to two-stroke? What corrosion issues, what lack of maintenance issues? Are those four-strokes more detrimental as they get older? Because there's a lot of two-strokes out there that are from the 90s and 80s, even guys from the 70s that are still running them. And four-strokes haven't been out that long, so we're going to have to check that longevity as time goes on. What he says here is he only uses the boat maybe 15 days a year, and half the time I'm running an electric trolling motor. So what is your boating usage? I was having a conversation with Aaron from Born Again Boating. I'll be on his podcast coming up soon, the Boaters Podcast, and that's what we were discussing. Some of the guys here in New Jersey, he's down in Florida, it's a different application. The guys down in Florida, they'll run their boats every day or every other day or 2 times a week plus the weekends, whereas in New Jersey, a lot of guys are just getting out on the weekends, and if they're fair weather boaters like me, when it gets cold, I'm wrapping it up for the season. So how many times do you actually use it that fuel economy is that much of a factor in the decision that you make? So let's continue on with some more. Robert Farasak says that he had a factory recall and he used the XD50 oil and run it wide open everywhere I go. I think it helps keeps the motor clean. And he heard he had problems with his ECM. He's talking about a FICT motor. So that's kind of a different two-stroke motor when they first got into that direct injection. Let's look at K. Peterson. My $1,300 used boat, so whole boat, came with a 15 horsepower 1984 Seahorse 7 years ago, did nothing but check and clean the spark plug, starts and runs every time. Now, might want to put a water pump in that, check the thermostat, maybe he's in fresh water, obviously. But, again, why would he make a change from that two-stroke motor if everything's running properly? So J.D. Silva said that he enjoyed what I said and has a 2002 Mercury 50 ELPTO. He uses in fresh water only. He mixes his oil and gas, so he's not using oil injection. And he was asking my opinion of what he should keep an eye on. So let me know what you guys, who has this motor and wants to make it run longer or already knows some of the tips and tricks to keep it running longer. Dustin Keating has a great comment here. I'm sticking with my '07 Yamaha 115 two-stroke. I only run non-ethanol gas with some Startron and Ring Clean additive at every fill-up. We can talk about what those additives can do. It starts flawlessly. Every time I start it up, and I always flush with fresh water, no running in salt water. I use flush every use. Oh, he says even though I'm not running in salt water, he flushes it with every use. Not sure that that's helping anymore, but all these little things are hopefully going to make him run that '07 motor for years to come. So here's Peter Parsons, 40 plus years on a 1985 Evinrude. Always use manufacturer's oil as recommended by his mechanic. And the engine has been thousands of hours now, and he should be used up, but it still runs good. In other words, this should be dead motor, 1985. Who would buy a 1985 motor for any price and expect to have longevity out of it? He owns it, it's been running fine, and it's amazing how the longevity you can get out of these. I wonder, will we get that same longevity out of four-strokes if they're maintained properly? We're going to find out in the years to come. A couple of things. He says, I'm really shocked that it still runs and have been anticipating a major failure, but nothing appears to be imminent. He says, I always buy the gallon jugs for oil for convenience, so money to be saved and purchase cheaper oils. Sticker shock with the price of a good four-stroke engine, so the Evinrude runs good. No reason, just seems wasteful. Here's Tim John. Four-strokes are technically better in every way and much nicer to operate. You can't argue with that. You turn that key, it's got electronic fuel injection like your cars do. They're smoother, quieter, no smoke, and they have good power for your boat. But unless they're fairly new, corrosion seems to be a major issue with them. I have a Suzuki, it's a 2006 here. It's got corrosion either inside the head or the block somewhere, and water's in the oil. What are we doing with that now? If I have a 2006 two-stroke motor that someone maybe didn't run the right oil in, I could rebuild that motor and get it back on the water. Is it going to be worth it to rebuild that four-stroke? I'm going to pull it apart in some upcoming videos and let you decide what we should do with it and what happened. Tim John also says, I've lost track at how many four-stroke outboards I've come across that were between 10 and 20 years old and are junk, milking up the oil from corrosion holes in cylinder blocks and heads. Maybe the newer ones are better, but still far too expensive to justify, at least for me. I've found that the less the engine gets used, the worse off you are, despite the fresh water flushing after each time. And he's letting you know that he's doing it in salt water, that he's using it. So, are these getting maintained properly, these motors that he's talking about? Would we have the same failures if they were two-strokes? Because we don't have that comparison because they're not being manufactured here in the United States anymore. So what do you think is best? And is that motor propped correctly? I've heard, and I'd like to get some feedback from some of you seasoned mechanics out there, maybe marina owners even, who've been around for many, many years selling these four-stroke motors. If they're not propped properly, I've found and I've seen motors corrode faster because they're running too hot of an exhaust because they're over-propped. So I'd like to get your guys' opinion on that. You may say, how does that happen? All I can tell you is I don't have a scientific, I just have evidence of many, many four-stroke motors that had issues with them, mainly corrosion in their exhaust areas for the Yamahas, which is what personally I've looked at the most, that have had that issue and also were over-propped. What do you think? Scott Silver says, you do not mention the superior lubrication system of the four-stroke motors, and you can get many, many more hours out of them versus the two-stroke. There's a reason why your automobile is a four-stroke and not just for pollution standards. Well, that's tough to argue with, right? If I have my oil inside my engine on a four-stroke with a pump that's lubricating it all the time, I should have less problems, and I have to agree with Scott. Most of the rebuilds I've ever done have been on two-strokes. I've done a couple of four-strokes with a bad cylinder here and there, but not nearly as much as the two-strokes that have had those similar rebuild needs. So is a four-stroke going to give us longevity or more hours? So there's plenty of those CTOs and commercial application engines with Yamaha. Some of them are switching to Hondas now, I've noticed, and they have 2,000 hours on their motors before they're flipping them, but that's only after a couple years. What are most boaters, or what is your boating needs? Are you only going out a couple hours on a Saturday, maybe 8-10 times a year? Are you really going to get that longevity, or is the corrosion going to catch up with you faster, like The other gentleman said because it doesn't get used as much, because when they sit, that's when they corrode even more. Is that the case? Let me know your opinion. W.T. Parber, I like your comment. People love to exaggerate the fuel economy of 4-strokes when comparing to older carb or EFI 2-strokes. There really isn't that much of a difference at cruising speed. So what is your experience? I have my buddy Bill Kuhn. We had a 250 horse OX66 Yamaha, and he ran through oil and gas a lot, but he runs his boat almost every other day because he lives on the lagoon. So he can come home and he can zip out around the bay. Now he's not shooting out to the canyon like the fishermen do here in New Jersey for tuna. He's just fishing around the bays and stuff like that. This was the first year he ran his new 250, well, used 250 4-stroke, and he says it wasn't in half, but he definitely saved on fuel plus the oil that he paid. So it was more of money than necessarily fuel consumption, because you also have to mix the oil. So what has your experience been? So I asked W.T. Barber, I've never switched and had that exact comparison. What's been your experience? So what did he say? I found a slight increase since I ditched 4-strokes and went back to a 2-banger. Interesting. I wonder why he did that. So, but for me, it's a bit of a no-brainer. I live right on the coast, so I get out regularly. Nearly all my stops are within 3 nautical miles, right? So he's not shooting out 50, 60 miles out to go for tuna. And I spend maybe 20 minutes getting out there, fish for usually 6 or 7 hours, then another 20 minutes getting back. So granted, you could see there's not a major fuel consumption issue as far as this particular person's boating is. Now let's look at Mexico Pescadero. What did he have to say here? The only difference is money. So he's just really taking a comparison financially only, right? You have idealists, you have realists. Realists understand that ideally, I'd love to have a 4-stroke motor if money grew on trees. Basically, the geography and microeconomics is not possible for me. So that's what I look at, and that's how I started in boating. I was 18 years old. I was making probably, when I was 18, I was probably making $7, $8 an hour at that time. Bought a boat for $67.50 that I'd saved up cutting lawns and stuff like that. And that was back in 1985, 84, something like that. So I could keep that going. Now, it was a 1980 motor, so this was a newer boat. It was only a 5, 6-year-old boat when I bought that. But I ran that sucker for 22 years because I took care of it right. Now, I had different motors and played different games with it, and then sold it, I think, like $3,500 22 years later. So if you're looking to get out on the water, and you do some basic boat tests. Is the transom okay? You look at my used outboard motor buying guide. This is what you want to pick up. It's $20 on Amazon, and I'm offering right now a free session over the phone for a boat or a motor you're looking to buy. At keith@outboarddad.com, you send me an email with proof of purchase of this guide that will walk you through compression tests, the tools that you need, everything that you need to do to check out your outboard motor before you buy. Are you still rolling the dice? Yes. Do you buy used cars? I buy used cars. So, of course, there's never a 100% guarantee like buying a new motor. That's why I have to say, when I hear this from Mexico, yeah, dude, I can't argue with you. How much money do you have available to spend so you can get out on the water? And if you learn how to take care of it, those old 2-strokes will keep you going for a little while longer. Eventually, they're going to get too old. Parts are going to get difficult to find. But right now, we can still do those things. Let me know your opinion. Please like, subscribe, send me those comments, and we look forward to continuing this debate on 2-stroke versus 4-stroke. Have a great day.